The name Babylon suggests evil powers, secret organizations acting in the dark to control you, to control us, to control the planet. And you know that the Quran speaks about Babylon. There's one text where it's mentioned, Al-Baqarah, this is chapter 2, verse 102. They followed the devil's instructions regarding the reign of Sylvain, Solomon. It was not Suleiman who disbelieved, but the devils, Shaitanina. They taught people sorcery, as well as what was revealed to the two angels in Babel, Harut and Marut. But these two taught no one anything without saying, "We're only a temptation, so do not disbelieve." This verse speaks about people who follow satanic instructions, what the devil says. They teach people sorcery, witchcraft. So here Babylon is not mentioned as a political empire, as it was, but as a place associated with magic. As we have noticed in previous episodes, the Quran mentions several powers or names, geographical, people, kingdoms, without explaining who it is. It's just an allusion. A lot of biblical narratives are also just mentioned very briefly in the Quran, as if the writer or the preacher would invite the people to read the full text in the Bible. Because all this mentioned in a nutshell in the Quran are well explained in the Bible. I mean, take the example of Babylon. One text in the Quran, in the Bible you find 13 full chapters just about Babylon. 13, that's enormous. We're not going to read all of them, of course, but let's start from the beginning of the story. In Genesis chapter 10, we have the mention of the children of Noah, so just after the flood. And one of Noah's grandsons is Cush. And it is said Cush had also a son named Nimrod, who became the first mighty warrior on earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, or we could translate, against the Lord. His kingdom began with Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. His kingdom began with Babel, same word as Babylon. Nimrod is the founder of Babel, or Babylon. In the Quran, Nimrod is not explicitly mentioned. However, Ibn Kathir, one of the greatest Mufassirun of Islam, identifies a king that is mentioned in the Quran, but without name, with Nimrod. We find the account of that king also in Al-Baqarah in verse 258. It tells the story of a king who debates with Prophet Abraham. Have you heard the story of the one whom Allah made a king and who opposed Ibrahim regarding his God? Ibrahim said, "My Lord is the one who gives life and causes death." "Me too," said the other. "I can give life and cause death." Ibrahim said, "Since Allah causes the sun to rise from the east, cause it to rise from the west." The king, the disbeliever, was then confounded. Allah doesn't guide the unjust. So this passage is very subtle. The king claims to be able to give life and death, probably by pardoning or executing prisoners. But then Abraham shifts the ground. He moves from a human argument to an indisputable cosmic phenomenon. God causes the sun to rise in the east. So you, if you are as mighty as God, make the sun rise from the west. And the result, the king is silenced. By the way, this story is a very classical example of an argument against human arrogance, as we found many in the Quran. Again, the name of this king is not mentioned, but Ibn Kathir associated him with Nimrod. And he said Nimrod was a tyrannical king who reigned in Mesopotamia. He is often associated with the city of Babylon. That's what Ibn Kathir says. Nimrod is regarded as someone who opposed God and Abraham, and sometimes portrayed as proclaiming himself divine. And this aligns with the account we have in the Bible where Nimrod is a hunter against the Lord. And also we find in archaeology a very interesting site, a mountain called after Nimrod, Nemrut Dağ in Turkey, Mount Nimrod. It's close to the city of Şanlıurfa in Turkey. And many traditions say that this city, Şanlıurfa, is the place where Abraham was born, the real Ur in Chaldea, but also where Nimrod is said to have ordered Abraham to be thrown into the fire. By the way, the story continues, God saved Abraham from the fire. Let's look at this Mount Nimrod, 2,203 meters, middle in nowhere. But the interesting thing is on the top of that mountain, there's a huge pile of stones, about 300,000 square meters, rubble, gravel. It's called a tumulus. Tumulus is a tomb, we find several in the ancient Orient, but this is the biggest one. We don't know what is behind this big pile of stone, but who brought all those stones all the way up to the mountain? Not only that, on the top of that mountain, just below the tumulus, you find statues, big, huge stones with the Greek gods, Zeus, the Godfather, and many others. And among others, the statue of a king called Antiochus. Antiochus I, who reigned about 70 before Christ. He is the one who is remembered in history because he united the Iranian, Persian, Greek, and Roman religions. And especially the main gods, which were Mithras in Iran, Apollos in Greek, and Helios, the god of the sun, in Rome. To go deeper into that story, let's go a little bit further from Turkey to Lebanon. There's a huge temple called Baalbek. Baalbek, the name says it, it has to do with Baal, very ancient god, 1000 before Christ. But the temple of Baalbek is also dedicated to a second god, Sol Invictus. So we understand that the first Baalbek was dedicated to Baal, and later on, during the Roman period, the Roman god Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun, would be worshipped there. And by the way, in Baalbek there's a big stone. On one side you find Baal, and the other side Mithras. Mithras is the sun god of the Persians. So on that temple we find a continuation of what Antiochus told us. Not only the Persian, Greek, and Roman gods are together, but they even come from much older divinities like Baal. And another thing, the wife of Baal is called Astarte, which is also Ishtar in Babylon, who we find in Ephesus under the name of Diana or Artemis, in the Middle East under the name Cybele, and even in the Quran mentioned Allat, the same god in all those cultures, from the very beginning of the time after the flood until the Roman Empire. By the way, the Emperor Constantine the Great was a great worshipper of Sol Invictus, the god sun. By the way, this continuation of pagan gods was stopped, if you want, by the Catholic Church when she invented in Ephesus, 431, the concept of Mary, Mother of God. This concept was reinforced in Constantinople, 553. And those in the Roman Empire would not accept the theology of Mother of God, Mary, Theotokos, God birth giver, would have to leave the Roman Empire. And at the time when many of those people come to the Middle East, the Near East, to Arabia, and when the Quran says God has no wife, Jesus is not the physical Son of God. So maybe the Quran here is an answer to that paganism. Now, what does this story has to do with Nimrod and with Babylon? First, let's summarize. In the Bible, Nimrod is presented as the founder of Babylon. And second, archaeology shows us that Nimrod's false religion spread throughout the world. There's much more to say. I wait for your comments because I want to just finish with a couple of remarks. In ancient Jewish commentaries, the Midrash, Nimrod is portrayed as the king who ordered the construction of the Tower of Babel. And I think we all know the story of the Tower of Babel. A tower built to reach the sky, Bab-El, a gate to God. A tower to put people in security from the judgment of God, like the flood, the water. Being on the top, they will escape this kind of future judgments. Themselves reaching God and being God, defying God, being worshipped. Now we understand why Nimrod is really an incarnation of evil powers. Let's talk a little bit more about the Tower of Babel, which is mentioned in the Bible in Genesis chapter 11. It is said in verse 2 that people left the east just after the flood, and they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they settled down there. They told each other, "Come on, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used bricks instead of stone, and bitumen for mortar. They said, "Let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let's make a name for ourselves," a name, symbol of reputation, "so that we won't be scattered over the face of the whole earth." So here again, a sign of arrogance, independence from God, protection against God's judgment. Let's continue reading. God intervenes. Verse 7. God says, "Let's go down and confuse their language." So the Lord scattered them from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. That's why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there he scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Babel, gate to God, becomes confusion, Balal in Hebrew. Babel becomes the place where God confused the language of mankind, and that's how most people remember the Tower of Babel. But wait, I'm going to show you something that will take your breath away. In Genesis 11, it is said that the whole earth had one language and the same words. But the chapter before, in Genesis chapter 10, it is said that the three sons of Noah had different languages, and their children also had different languages. So how do we explain that? A closer look at the text we just read is that the whole earth didn't have one language, as we normally translate, but one global communication system, Sapahat, and a common agenda. That's the more exact translation of that text. And so in verse 7, it is said that God went down and confused their global communication system so that the people would not longer understand one another. The result, yes, the Lord scattered them from there over the face of the earth. And verse 9, that's why it was called Babel. From there, the Lord confused their global communication system, again the same word, and from there scattered them from over the face of the whole earth. I think this translation is not just more accurate, but it's important because Babylon in the end time symbolized a worldwide system and a worldwide communication system. It reminds us, of course, of WWW, World Wide Web, and also all the endeavor to have one agenda worldwide, global agenda. Babylon, a global communication system, a common goal. In another video, we'll talk about the king of Babylon. Let's turn to the New Testament. There, Babylon is no more depicted as a political power for the simple reason that the city of Babylon has been destroyed. Babylon is in the New Testament, like in the Quran, a spiritual power. In 1 Peter chapter 5, the name Babylon is used as a secret name for the city of Rome, the capital of the Roman Empire. Later on in the book of Revelation, at the end of the Bible, Babylon is described, and we're going to read a couple of texts. Revelation chapter 17, John said that he was carried away in the spirit into the wilderness. And there he said, I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast covered with blasphemous names, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. This woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held in her hand a golden cup filled with abominations and the impurities of her prostitution. What? Babylon, a prostitute? Let's continue. On her forehead was written a name, a mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. I saw this woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And then John says, when I saw her, I was filled with great astonishment, acting under demonic powers. But it's not all. In the next chapter, in chapter 18, he said, she has fallen, Babylon the Great. Now listen, she has become a dwelling place for demons. Wow! Like in the Quran, a prison for every unclean spirit, a prison for every unclean and detestable bird. For all the nations have drunk the wine of the fury of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich through the abundance of her luxury. Here, Babylon is englobing politics, business, everything. The whole world is under the power, under the spell of this demonic power, Babylon, a huge prostitute. Babylon is a dwelling of all evil powers, of all demons. The good news is that Babylon, this system of one world government, one global system of communication, is going to collapse quickly, suddenly, as the city of Babylon, this huge city, collapsed under the influence of the Iranians, the Persians, as we have studied from the Quran and from the Bible in the former video. Babylon has fallen. And then the text says, come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, and so that you will not receive any of her plagues. We live at the end of the time, and it's fascinating to see how the world tries to come together, all the demonic powers, to fight against the truth and people of goodwill. Next time we're going to study more about that. But let us remember today that God will be victorious. Assalamu alaikum.